Hey guys, Miss Fearing here. Welcome to Unit 5 Notes 3. Today we're going to go ahead and look at the quadratic formula. This is going to be a formula that we can use to help find any of our roots or our zeros. So before we actually jump into what the quadratic formula is, we need to look at the basics or the pieces that are going to be involved in the quadratic formula. So some of these things you've seen before, others you really want to make sure that you can plug into your calculator or find them on your calculator so that when you actually are doing the quadratic formula, you're getting the correct answer. So problem number 1 here, when I'm just asked to simplify these, when you're taking the square root of 16, you're going to find that square root button on your calculator and you're going to plug it in. But basically you're looking for what number times itself is going to get 16. So I'm going to get 4. 4 times 4 would give me 16 and I'd be back to where I started from. Number 2, then I'm looking at the square root of 25. Well, I know the square root of 25 is 5, so this whole piece I know is going to be 5. And because I haven't touched the negative at all, I need to carry that with, so I'm going to still end up with a negative 5. Example number 3, when you do this, you can actually plug everything underneath the square root into your calculator to figure out what number that would be. I would just recommend that when you do this, you go ahead and you put this number in parentheses as well. So if I were to plug that into my calculator, I would end up with 16. And I still have not taken the square root. I didn't put that button into my calculator at all. So I still have to do that piece as well. So the square root of 16 then I know is 4. Next example here, I'm looking for the square root of 49. So I'm going to look at doing this piece first. And that's going to end up giving me 7. And then because I haven't touched that sign out in front, and we call that sign the plus or minus, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to carry that down. So when you hear me say plus or minus in this video, I'm not asking you to pick which one. It literally is a actual function that we're going to start looking at. It's a plus. I get the positive number and I get the minus number. So I would actually have two different answers. I would have the positive 7 and the negative 7. So now we're going to dig into the next piece. Looking at example number 5 here, again, I would pretend like this number is in parentheses. So I would do 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 2. I'm going to put that all in. And if I put that all into my calculator, I'm going to end up getting 25. And again, I haven't taken the square root of that. I haven't put that button in my calculator at all. So after I do that, I'm going to end up with 5. Example number 6. You want to put all of this into the calculator first to get that number. So I'm going to end up doing that. I'm going to get negative 7 minus. Once I put that all in, I still have the square root of 9. So now I'm going to do this step by step. I'm going to take the square root first. So I'm going to get negative 7 minus the square root of 9 I know is 3. So then I can plug negative 7 minus 3 into my calculator and I end up with a negative 10. Last example here, that plus or minus actually means that you have a 11 plus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times 2, and an 11 minus the square root of everything that's underneath it. So we're going to do this piece by piece. Don't try to do it all at once because that's when you make mistakes. We want to put this into our calculator first and figure out what that is going to end up being. So I'm going to end up with 11 plus or minus the square root of 9. From there, I want to take the square root first. So I'm going to end up with 11 plus or minus 3. When you are left to just that plus or minus and then some numbers, that's when you split it into two equations. I have 11 plus 3 and I have 11 minus 3. So my two answers would be 14 and 8. So here's when we're actually going to see the quadratic formula for the first time. So the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b. So when you see this, it's the opposite of b. So if it was a positive, it's going to be a negative. If it was a negative, it's going to be a positive. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. That entire thing is divided by 2 times a then. So when I put this into my calculator, I always put parentheses around every single variable that I would be plugging in. And remember, we find our a, b, and c from standard form of a quadratic. So I'm going to find it from putting everything in to y equals or 0 equals, and then get my a, my b, and my c from there. We talked about this a little bit. When we use the quadratic formula is when we were trying to find the roots or the zeros. Our solutions are x-intercepts. And we've actually found these before when we used that x method. So every time you were using the x method, you were going to get an x equals answer, and that was a root or a zero or an x-intercept. In order to use the quadratic formula, this is really, really important right here. You need to make sure that you are set equal to 0. If it's not set equal to 0, you have to go do that before you can find your A, your B, and your C. So here are the steps that you take for the quadratic formula. Write out what A, B, and C are equal to. We are then going to plug in A, B, and C into our quadratic formula. You're going to simplify it, and then we're going to round our answers to 2 decimal places. Again, we want 2 decimal places. So here's the first example we're going to look at. It's 3t squared minus 7t minus 20 equals 0. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the quadratic formula, which I'm going to write up here. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay. Step 1, we need to find out what is A, what is B, and what is C. Well, before I can do that, I want to make sure I'm set equal to 0. I am set equal to 0, so I can go right into it. I know A is going to be my thing that has the variable squared next to it, or the coefficient with the variable squared, so it's 3. B is going to be the coefficient with just the variable, so that's going to be a negative 7, and watch it, since it's a minus sign, it's a negative 7. And then C is just the constant, so I get a negative 20. So from here, you're going to go ahead and you're going to plug your A, your B, and your C into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to have x equals the opposite of B. Well, B is negative 7, so the opposite of that is a positive 7. Plus or minus the square root. B squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. So we need to simplify this and get this down. Step 1 for me is to simplify everything that's underneath here first. Okay, so I'm going to plug that in to the calculator, and I'm going to end up getting x equals, I haven't touched the 7 plus or minus, the square root, I'm going to get 289. If I plug that in, I got 289. Divided by, I always do the 2 times 3 as well, or the bottom piece as well, because we can do that in our brain. From here then, your step is to actually take the square root of that number. This is where most people make the mistake. They forget to take the square root. So the square root of 289 is 17. I'm still divided by 6. This is the point where you're going to split off into 2 separate equations. I'm going to get 7 plus 17 divided by 6, and I'm going to get 7 minus 17 divided by 6. Simplify the top first, so I get 24 divided by 6 before I do that division. So again, you're going to simplify the top before you do the division. I'm going to end up getting 4 and a negative 5/3. If you put that as a decimal, that would be fine as well. And those would be my 2 answers. So example number 2, I have f of x. This thing, don't let that freak you out. This is another way of just saying y. Y equals x squared plus 3x plus 18. So I need to be set equal to 0. Well, in this situation, I'm set equal to y. That's okay. It's the same thing. There's just not a number over there. So that's good. So now I'm going to go into a equals, b equals, and c equals. A in this situation is the coefficient with the variable squared, so it's a 1. B is the coefficient with the variable, so it's a 3. And C is the constant, so it's an 18. From there, I'm going to plug it into that quadratic formula again. So I'm going to rewrite it up here so we see it. B squared minus 4 times A times C. And you need to remember this quadratic formula. It will not be given to you on a quiz, so make sure that you have this memorized. So now I'm going to plug everything in. Opposite of B is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. So I'm going to do what's underneath the square root first. I'm going to plug that in my calculator. I'm going to get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of a negative 63 divided by 2 times 1 is 2. So I'm going to go and I'm going to try to take the square root of a negative 63. You're going to notice that you're going to get something that says this, domain error. Domain error. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a number times itself that's going to get you underneath or get you to negative 63. You can't do that. There is no number times itself that would get you to negative 63 because the negative times the negative will get you back to a positive. So whenever you see a negative number underneath that square root right there, you are going to write right away no solution and you are going to be done with the problem. Okay, so again, if you have a negative underneath the radical or the square root sign, then it is a no solution and you can't go any further. Okay, example number 3 here. I have 4x squared plus 2x equals 17. If I want to use a quadratic formula, remember I have to be equal to 0 first. So I'm going to subtract 17 from both sides. And I'm going to be left with 4x squared plus 2x minus 17 is equal to 0. So now I can do my a equals, a is 4, b is going to equal my 2, and then c will be my negative 17. And I can plug this into the quadratic formula. So x equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug everything underneath the radical into my calculator first. So I'm going to get x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root. If I plug all that in, I get 276 divided by 8. So I'm going to go ahead and take the square root of 276. I'm going to get negative 2 plus or minus. That's going to be a decimal. It's okay. Decimals are good. It's going to be 16.61 divided by 8. And from here, remember, that's when we get our two equations. So I'm going to get negative 2 plus 16.61 and then divide by 8. And negative 2 minus 16.61 divided by 8. We always want to simplify the top first. So I'm going to end up in this one getting 14.41 divided by 8. And then down here I'm going to end up getting negative 18.61 divided by 8. Now you do that division, I would end up with 1.83. And I got a negative 2.33. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get you started on this one, and then I want you to go ahead and try it on your own and come back and check your work. So remember, the f of x equals is just like saying y equals, which means there's a 0 over there. There's no number over there, so we're good. So we're going to go straight into a equals, b equals, and c equals. So a in this situation is going to be a negative 8, b is a 10, c is my constant. So what number would be there? Well, there isn't one, so I'm going to add a 0. So it's going to be a 0. From here now, you can go ahead and you can plug it into your quadratic formula. So go ahead, try this on your own, pause the video, come back and check your work when you're done. So I ended up getting 0 as my first answer and 5/4 or 1.25 as my second answer. If you didn't get that, please come chat with me. You probably made a mistake plugging it into your calculator, and I want to make sure we get that cleared up before moving on to the practice problems. So let's go